Today on The Big Show, we're celebrating landmark anniversaries, bold stories, and timeless heroes that shaped the culture on screen and on the page. We'll revisit the film that changed Black cinema forever with Boys in the Hood, honor the legacy of Spike Lee's powerful documentary, Four Little Girls, explore the cultural history of Superman, and share our take on the latest big screen adaptation of The Man of Steel. We'll have all that and more on the latest episode of Keeping It Real with Film Gordon. Let's go. Welcome to the latest episode of The Big Show, Keeping It Real with Film Gordon. I am Tim Gordon, and I am joined by Charles Kirkland Jr. Charles, how you doing today, brother?
I don't know yet. I'll let you know as we get into it.
All right,
But
cool. That's honest. I can't even get mad at that, man. So, as you heard me say, Charles and the T's, man, of course, it's Superman all day today. One of the biggest and most anticipated films of the year drops in theaters this weekend. And you and I both were at the screening, so we're going to share our take a little later on in the show. Today is also anniversaries, man. There were actually several more, but I wanted to really focus on these two films, which I think are legacy foundational films in their own right. Which ironically, I didn't even pick this up, Charles, until after I'd done it. But you're talking about Spike Lee and John Singleton, man, with Boys in the Hood and Four Little Girls. So for both of these filmmakers, man, and these films that we'll talk about momentarily, these are two films, man, that I love dearly, that are very near and dear to my heart. And as we joked a couple of weeks ago when we were doing our top 10 films of all time, this is stuff, man. I can't really speak for you, so I'll speak for me. This is stuff that I breathe and it kind of comes out of my pores and my DNA, man. These films and these stories, and I love them dearly, man. What say you about that, man? Because I wanted to let you speak for yourself on that.
well, I believe Boys in the Hood is a classic, and just needs to be remembered. We'll talk about Four Little Girls as we get to it.
All right, man. So, without any further ado, man, let's just jump into it, man. And as I said today, this is the 35th and 34th, excuse me, anniversary of Boys in the Hood, which was released July the 12th, 1991. Singleton's debut redefined how Hollywood portrayed Black communities and who could tell those stories. Now, I wrote in my notes before Ryan Coogler, before Tyler Perry, before Gina Prince Bythewood and Ava DuVernay, it was John Singleton, man. And Singleton's story, I mean, it's already kind of known. He was inspired by Spike Lee, met him when I guess he was 17. He had seen, he met Spike Lee after a screening of She's Gotta Have It and told
Mm.
him that one day he was going to make movies like Spike. And I'm sure Spike heard bunches of people walk up to him during those days, and he's like, "Yeah, yeah, kid, whatever." And then 4 years later, Singleton, man, he had his magnus opus, man, when he dropped that film. And what can we say about it, man? I mean, I think looking back on it now, and Charles, the further we get away from this film, you think about the cast, like the casting agent who worked on this film, man. And that casting agent cast before these guys were stars, Angela Bassett, Regina King, Nia Long, Ice Cube, Morris Chestnut, Cuba Gooding Jr. Now, the only person in this cast who really sort of had a career prior was probably Lawrence Fishburne, right? He had a,
Right,
a,
right.
a, a, a small career, but he had a career. He had done Cornbread Earl and Me. I know, people say, well, Regina King did 227. Yeah, she was a kid on 227. But
Right.
for the rest of these guys, did you see any did you know any of these actors? I mean, I saw Cuba Gooding Jr. sitting in a chair in a scene in Coming to America where he didn't have any lines, and Eddie Murphy was pretending like he was cutting his hair. But any of these guys, Charles, I mean, think about this cast. Who can boast that there's like 6 or 7 people that you literally find who all go on and have like major careers? All of them.
Well, but if you think about Ice Cube, he had been a rapper for a long time. He and stuff. So you kind of knew who Ice Cube was. So he didn't
Not a long
exactly,
time. I mean, NWA, this is 91. So NWA had dropped in 88. And,
yeah.
people in hip hop knew who Ice Cube was, but the nation didn't know Ice Cube as an actor. No.
No, no, not as an actor, not
No.
exactly not, but they knew who he was as a musician. I knew heard of him as a rapper. So, when the film came around in '91, but you're absolutely correct. Singleton assembled a motley crew of of not even stars yet, just people, and made them stars with this film, actually.
Yeah, man, it is so amazing to me, man. When you think back, like watching it now, it makes sense now. As I said, when you watch it, you go, "Oh, that's such and such," and "Oh, that's such and such." No, when Singleton cast all these guys, man, he went and found a really strong group of actors. And I think the other thing that's inspirational about this film, man, is that you had a story of a young black man. And at the heart of the story is that he's raised by his mother to a certain age, right? And once she discovers that he needs a man, he needs that masculine energy, he needs somebody to kind of give him the other side of that relationship. She calls up his father, played by Lawrence Fishburne, who is famously Furious Styles, right? And you saw the way that the lessons that he gave him throughout, like they would have these sessions where he would be cutting his hair and he'd be talking to him about women and he'd be talking to him about life and talking to him about how to navigate in society. The scene, Charles, where he takes both Cuba Gooding Jr. and Morris Chestnut into the hood and explains to them gentrification and how all that works. I mean, there was so many things about Boys in the Hood that made it the landmark film it was. It wasn't just about the violence and all of the other stuff that happened, because sort of like a that was sort of like a part of growing up during that time and what South Central LA was all about. And John Singleton didn't shy
Right.
away and he put that on film. But I just think the further, how sometimes we have conversations, you and I, about, man, that film just didn't age well, man. Like, you've heard me use that phrase, like that film didn't age well. Boys in the Hood at 34 years after its release is as relevant now as it was in 1991. The problems that film addressed in 91 are still problems that exist today.
And I think that's really sad because you would think that maybe our people should have evolved some from in 34 years, but we're still fighting the same battles, living in the same lives that these people faced. They face in that movie, and it is kind of sad, but it does make the point that these kind of things are universal and they last forever.
I
We're
mean,
dealing with some intergenerational trauma that's lasted for some time. So yeah, it's a relevant topic.
and then the other one that I forgot, man, was Ice Cube. We talked about him being a rapper with NWA, along with that amazing ensemble that he recorded with. But they talked about the police brutality, and there's an amazing scene in this film where both Gooding Jr. and Chestnut are pulled over, and a police officer, man, a black police officer,
Yeah, yeah.
just draws a gun on them, thinking that they're members of a gang, and this kind of real interaction, man. That black men, and we talk about it. You and I have talked about it, Charles, and I've talked about it with friends. As a black man, that there's this stigma. that every black man goes through if you're driving in a car and a police car pulls behind you. And Singleton was able to encapsulate that in that scene in a way that made it relatable to like the entire audience, man. Like everybody understood what that feeling felt like. So
Yeah.
I think, man, Boys in the Hood continues to me to be a standard bearer. Now, when we did our list about 6 weeks ago, I want to say I don't remember if Boys was on my list. I'm assuming it was as the top 10 black films of all time. I don't remember. I
I
mean,
don't
I don't know if it made your list. Did it make yours? Did you remember?
I don't think it did, no.
Yeah, but I know I think it made my list, but I don't know. I mean, the fact that what Singleton and let's just talk a little bit about his legacy, right? So after he made this film, I call it his Magnus Opus. That is the best film. It was his Citizen Kane, right? I mean, let's be real about it. He made Poetic Justice. He did Rosewood. He did Shaft, which I really wasn't a big fan of his Shaft. Um, Baby Boy, which came along. So he had like this whole thing, this series, Higher Learning. He also did. Um, but I think the top off his legacy, right? So you had this amazing debut film in Boys in the Hood, and the last project that John Singleton worked on before his untimely passing was Snowfall. And
Yeah.
Snowfall, you've heard me rave that, I was telling somebody earlier, I said from start to finish, the arc on this film, this Franklin Saint that Damson Idris plays, it is one of the most heartbreaking arcs. And, even though John Singleton, I think, was gone before the series wrapped up, the fact that he was smart enough to collaborate with the great Walter Mosley, who sort of produced this thing and wrote and produced some of these episodes. I just think it was brilliant, man. And Singleton, man, left us at 51 years old way too early, man. I would have loved to have seen a seasoned 60 and 70-year-old Singleton kind of giving us his take on race in the way that Spike Lee has evolved to. Like those two together, I think would have really been standard bearers for that generation to help kind of shepherd the Kuglers and these other guys that are coming along now, Barry Jenkins, a lot of these other guys. That's a huge loss, man. He is one of five black men, Charles, who has had a picture nominated for Best Picture by the Academy. There's only been five guys. It's him, Lee Daniels, I want to say Steve McQueen, Barry Jenkins, who actually is the only guy who ever won. And I'm leaving somebody out.
Spike Lee, Spike Lee.
Right. So there you go. There you go.
I'm looking back at my list, but Boys in the Hood was number 4 on my list, actually. So yeah.
Yeah, and I know I probably had it on my list. I mean, you can't go without Boys in the Hood, man. Boys in the Hood is a standard bearer and a classic, man. So any final takes, man, on Boys in the Hood before we move on to our next anniversary film, which I think is equally as important.
Just to wrap it up, I mean, Singleton was a groundbreaker in many ways. Nobody had ever had an rapper be an actor before this either, and now we got LL Cool J. I mean, you had like Crush Groove and all those kind of things where they were playing it kind of themselves, but with Ice Cube in this movie, he's stepping out of who he was as a rapper and actually playing a role. And that just opened up the door for a whole lot of other people to become serious actors as after being rappers.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, man, because you're absolutely right that he did cast a rapper. And it was also notable that before he died, John Singleton really wanted Tupac Shakur for the baby boy role. And I think back that, he cast Busta Rhymes in Higher Learning, no, I'm sorry, he cast Tupac Shakur as well in Poetic
Poetic
Justice.
justice. Yeah,
So he didn't have an issue. He was, to your point, he was one of the first directors to really kind of like be of the 90s and fuse, hip hop into modern culture in that way. And
yeah.
I wish we could have gotten a Tupac Shakur, and not saying instead of Tyree, but a Tupac Shakur in Baby Boy, because I thought that Baby Boy as a screenplay was another. He Singleton really excelled in these really intimate looks of young black men, right? So if you think about
Hmm.
Boys in the Hood, that's the story about a young through the point of view of a young black man. Of course, Higher Learning is the same thing. Rosewood is a little different, but Baby Boy is absolutely through that gaze as well. And Singleton, man, that's a gift that he had. And again, it's so funny, Charles, because a lot of times when filmmakers are in the middle of their career, we're not really appreciating and understanding until some years that we're able to step back and take a look at it and analyze it all, and then it starts to make a little more sense. So, and it's probably the first time I've ever articulated this, but it probably makes sense that that's who John Singleton was. He was a guy
Yeah,
who was really immersed in what young black men were going through of his generation, and he put it on film, much in the same way that Spike Lee was immersed in race, and he put race on in ways sometimes that made people uncomfortable. So,
yeah.
having said that, that's the perfect segue to get to our next movie, which is the 28th anniversary, I want to say, of Four Little Girls. Now, I know at the top when we talked about Four Little Girls, I have very strong feelings about this movie because being born the same year that this Birmingham bombing took place, I was always well aware of it as a kid. And, well aware of it in a way that, you study Black history and you understand the injustices and things that occurred. And let's just put it out there, man. I thought this movie when it came out was an instant masterpiece, man. It was released July the 9th, 1997. It revisited the tragic 1963 bombing of Birmingham's 16th Street Baptist Church. Now, what I love so much about this, Charles, is that it reminded us that these were real girls, real children with hopes and dreams, not just footnotes in history. And, when you talk about who these four little girls were, and hold on one second, because I want to make sure that we acknowledge who these young women were. And I apologize that I'm just going to take a break because I wanted to make sure that we
I can I
remembered
can
their
tell you
names.
I can tell you their
Say their
names.
names, man. Say their names, man.
Addie Mae Collins, Carol Denise McNair,
Hmm.
Carol Rosamond Robertson, and Cynthia Wesley.
You say Carol Robinson.
Carol Rosamond
Robert.
Robertson.
Okay. Yeah, man. So that story, man, really touched me when I watched it. It ended up being nominated for Best Documentary Feature and still remains a vital civil rights documentary. Uh, this story, man, along there are two stories that I think are legendary, not legendary, legendary in our community. And both of them were big parts on the civil rights movement, right? And the third story is, of course, the disappearance of is it Cheney, Sherner, and the three civil
Oh,
rights workers.
the three civil rights workers. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
the three
I don't.
stories. There are three of these stories that really resonate. So the first one, of course, is Emmett Till, right? What happened, and that's been put on film. The disappearance of these three guys were a huge part of Mississippi Burning, which was also put on film, not in a really positive way. Really wasn't a big fan of that film. But Four Little Girls, man, this story, to me, man, just resonates because what Spike did is he actually went to the families, right? If you watch this doc and he interviews all the family members and how heartbreaking it was then, and then at the point 28 years ago when he was putting this doc out, it is just an emotional, powerful doc, right? And the fact that Spike was able to dig out the research, find the guy who was acquitted for this, who was charged. I mean, who was brought to trial but never charged. Um, Everything about this documentary, man. Almost get emotional talking about it. Charles, what did you think? Because I know you said you had some issues and you wanted to talk about it. Where are you at with Four Little Girls?
I grew up in Washington, D.C., and we were strong into Black history there, and so I knew the stories of the four little girls, and that's why I know their names. But I've only ever seen the movie once because I know the story. And matter of fact, I went to the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And if you don't know anything about the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, at the time when I was there, we had a president who was really not good, and we got him removed. And Freeman Hrabowski came in as the new president of the school. Freeman Hrabowski attended the church. He was there that day, the day of the bombing, and so it was another touch point for me about this story because I could actually sit down and talk with him, and he would tell me stuff about Birmingham and that church and how the community reacted. And, I mean, he was a child growing up through all of that. And so this story has always been very close to my heart, along with Emmett Till, because these were children that just faced I mean, you talk about the three people who were disappeared in Mississippi. That was Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner.
Turner,
Uh,
Turner, yeah.
but those were adults who were fighting in these were children though who had no skin in that game. They shouldn't have to face this kind of issue. And so when Spike made this movie, because it was Spike, I said I'm going to watch it. But I knew the story. But it's just heartbreaking, a heartbreaking story. So
Well, it's
yeah.
heartbreaking from a standpoint that it's heartbreaking on several levels, Charles. It's heartbreaking because you know the story and it's four little girls, but it's also at a church. And you would think
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you come into the house of God, the house of worship, and why would somebody feel that they want to bomb a church? And just the fact, like we talked about in the 90s where churches were getting burned down, and it's just I have the words, but we're doing an entertainment show and we're talking about a film, so I'm not gonna go there. But my God, man, I mean, whew. All right. As I said, man, let's pivot from that from a second, so I don't go down a road that's gonna drag us someplace else to talking about the legacy of Spike Lee, right? And you've heard me say privately to you, publicly on this podcast for years, that I still think he's probably the greatest black filmmaker that America's ever produced, right? And when I say black filmmaker, I'm not talking about black filmmaker that telling of black stories because he's great at that. But I'm talking
Hmm.
about his skill and technical acumen that Spike Lee belongs to me on the same level as what a Spielberg or Scorsese, a Nolan, he belongs on that level to me. Akira Kurosawa as a storyteller. Spike Lee is absolutely amazing. And it reminds me, just as an aside, Charles, that I have friends of mine who are Giants fans. I'm a New York Giants fan, right? In football.
Hmm.
And I used to
Yeah.
tell them when Eli Manning was playing, I said, there's going to come a day that you're going to miss Eli Manning. And this is when he was playing, and people were like castigating him. And I was like, so now my friends come back and tell me, Tim, you were right. There's going to come a day when Spike Lee stops making movies that you're going to miss. And you're going to look back on his body of work and you'll see what I've been telling you all these years is Spike Lee is special, right? Now, not just special from the standpoint of who he is as a filmmaker, but special because of where he came from and the time he dropped. Because we told his story, Charles, when Spike Lee made his first movie in 1986, the landscape for black cinema had changed drastically because a decade before we had like all these films coming out, this black exploitation era. We had the LA Rebellion at the end of the 70s with Julie Dash and Charles Burnett and Janaa Fanaka and all these kinds of folks. But it was a landscape where there weren't a lot of black films being made by black people at all, right? So, of course, you had Kathleen Collins in the early 80s, Ayoko Chinzira, Julie Dash. these folks. Now, I'm not saying when I say no film, I'm talking about studio films, right? You know, outside of an occasional Ray Don Chong, Prince would put a couple of movies out, The Color Purple, you know, Charles Fuller's A Soldier Story. Who else? Like now you turn around and you throw a rock and there's a new Ava DuVernay film and a new Barry Jenkins film and a new Steve McQueen film and a new Barry Jenkins film and a new Gina Prince Bythewood's got like there's a like all these black filmmakers. But when Spike Lee came along, there was none of that, right?
Right,
He drops in
right.
'86 with She's Gotta Have It. Soon, both Robert Townsend, Keenan Ivory Wayans are making films. Eddie Murphy, I know, directs a movie later on. And then comes John Singleton, and then that kind of kickstarted the door to 1991, where you had 17 stories directed by black and brown people, meaning, you know, everything. And not all of them were good. I saw them all, and Charles, look, they all weren't good. Who remembers Perfume?
Not
I'll
me.
wait. Up Against the
I,
Wall. Talking Dirty After Dark.
I remember talking dirty after dark and up against the wall.
Hanging with the Homeboys. There was a
Yeah.
lot of movies that were put out in 1991, man. Living Large. Remember that? I could
Oh
just
yeah.
pull them off. Living Large. There were a bunch of them. Now, everybody, of course, remembers Boys in the Hood, Daughters of the Dust, New Jack City, right? Everybody remembers those. But there's a lot of movies that hit in 1991. Matty Rich, you know, straight out of Brooklyn. Yeah, there's silence for a reason. So my point is that somebody like Spike Lee was the guy that revolutionized and kickstarted what I call the third renaissance of black film. And along after those guys came, the Leslie Harrises and Ernest Dickersons and all these folks, we get Gina Prince Bythewood. We eventually get Tyler Perry. We eventually get like this whole range of filmmakers, but all those filmmakers are coming out the tree that Spike Lee planted in 1986, which to me, he's to himself an incredible filmmaker. But the fact that he gave everybody the aspiration that if he could do it, then I need to tell these stories too. And he proved the power of what it meant to sit behind and helm these projects. So for that reason, Spike Lee, I think, is probably, if not the best filmmaker, probably the most important one. And I will stand by that one. So Charles, thoughts, man, so I can get off my soapbox.
Well, I don't think there's much more to say, but I agree. Spike Lee is a talent that we've often goes underappreciated, I believe. I think we just take him for granted that he's always going to be doing great stuff, and there's going to be a time where you're going to like, hey, where's Spike? And I mean, we may have people like Coogler and them who tell their stories and fill the space, but there's not going to be another Spike, at least not for a while.
I got you, man. All right, Charles. Before we move on, man, I just want to remind people because we always talk about our show. I want to make sure you guys subscribe to our podcast and stay connected at Film Gordon for more cultural conversations like these, man. Because this is what we do, bro. We are film every week. And also, I'll also remind you that if you want to listen to our podcast, man, we are now everywhere where podcasts are, man. You can listen to us on Apple and Spotify. We're everywhere, bro. Come on, man.
Everywhere.
You didn't know that, man? You know we was everywhere, worldwide,
Eh,
worldwide,
no, I'm just saying everywhere. We're everywhere.
everywhere, sir. All right, man. So in a minute, we're going to review Superman, and this is more for me than it is for Charles. Charles laughs at me all the time because, you know, I always tease people and tell them that, you know, I feel like I'm missing something when I'm watching these comic superhero films because it's always like some cool stuff that happens. And I haven't read the comics, man. So I don't know what I'm missing. So for me, I thought it would be a great idea. And then I'd share with the audience of a series of articles about Superman, right? Leading up to the release this weekend of the film, right? So earlier this week, I wrote a piece, man, called Superman, Why We Still Believe a Man Can Fly. And in that piece, Charles, I talked about his origin story and his enduring impact, man. And of course, Charles, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but for the audience who's not you, uh, born in Action Comics #1, which was back in 1938 by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, Superman emerged during the Great Depression as a symbol of hope. Now, early Superman stood up for everyday people, tackling injustice when systems failed them, the ultimate hero for the underdog. And Charles, I know that there's going to be our conservative friends who are going to be mad at this next line, but this didn't come from me, but it was told to me that his story was an immigrant story. He was an outsider, an alien finding a home and protecting it. And every generation since Charles has reimagined him, but his core values of hope, sacrifice, compassion, they continue to endure. His greatest power reminds us that heroism is about using strength for others. And with that, Charles Kirkland, what do you say about the evolution of this character from then to now? And during the different iterations, whether it's the television versions or whether it's the versions on the big screen, has those core values remained for this character, or have they changed and shifted over time?
I think the focus on who Superman is always changes because we have to interpret him in the times in which we live. Back in the early days when Siegel and Schuster created the comic book, we're looking at a world that's got wars going on, and you need someone who's going to stand up for the American way around the world. And so they created this character. But every generation has its own idea, and every artist that comes along and writes a story for Superman is telling the world how Superman should be interpreted in this day and age. And that's why with this film we'll talk about, and it really starts with All-Star Superman that Grant Morrison started back in 2005, where he starts talking about the alien heritage of Superman, and how, how does he fit into this world being an alien, and what does the world think about him being an alien. And the right now we have this whole conception about what it is to be an alien here in the United States.
Hmm.
And so I believe that those things, the comic books are always a social commentary. And so that they're we now, as we reinterpret what the world is going through, we got to see Superman in that same commentary. And I think that's positive. I think that's what keeps these things alive.
Now, the other thing I wrote this week, Charles, which again, you just referenced one of them. I spent yesterday, because I know we were going to talk about this week, looking at the animated series, and I've seen several of them over recently, which I wanted to kind of go over with you, right? So I watched um, Superman Red Sun, which I thought was fantastic as an animated story. Why are you over there smiling like that, man? Red Sun was fun.
Yeah,
Red
it was.
Sun,
It was.
Red
I,
Sun takes the myth of Superman that instead of him landing in Kansas, which is a story that we know, he landed in Russia instead. And Charles, talk a little bit about how much fun Red Sun was with Superman now imagined as Russia's Superman instead of Superman in America.
Well, again, when you look at when you reinterpret, it's just like with these all these Elseworld stories. When we even had a story where instead of being raised by the Kents, Superman was raised by Thomas Wayne, the father of Bruce Wayne, and how he changed. And so again, it's all about how you can conceive the all the conditions that made Superman be who Superman is, and then twist them and say, well, what if? I mean, Marvel has a wonderful series of what ifs, but these are the same thing with these Elseworlds. And so yeah, it's really fun to imagine what Superman would be like, and how he would behave if he were anywhere else or anyone else, or raised by someone else, or in what, because it's not about and the movie will talk about this. It's not about the nature of the person. It's sometimes it's about the nurture of the person as well that creates who we are. And so we get these opportunities to see Superman in all these different ways, and it's really fun. And it's real. I mean, it's Red Sun is an very interesting series, and I liked it a lot.
So, in addition to Red Sun, Charles, I also watched All Star Superman. I watched The Death of Superman and The Reign of Supermen, and then I finished with Man of Tomorrow. Um, wow, it was very interesting, which we'll talk about in the review of how understanding those core values that I talked about earlier, because all I knew about Superman was what I'd seen on screen, right? So, whether it was, the dopey George Reeves in the 50s, Christopher Reeves, as I affectionately call him, Superman 78, his Superman portrayal. And then we got these darker versions, man. Bryan Singer's Superman Returns, and of course what Zack Snyder did with Man of Steel, where they took all the hope and optimism and all the fun out of the character and made the characters darker. So it was interesting after having seen James Gunn's Superman and then going back and watching these animated series over the last couple of weeks, like, oh, that's what that represents what the comic books were trying to tell us about Superman. So I thought for me it was interesting. For you, Charles, I always get mad at Charles because Charles will give me this look he's giving me right now, like, you ain't know that, man. I read that.
Well, and that's why when Snyder and what's his face did those dark versions of Superman, a lot of people hate those movies. They really don't like them because it's not who Superman is, and you if you mess too much with who Superman is, I mean, in versus Red Sun. But if you mess too much and people, that's not who we grew up with Superman, and that's not the Superman that we want to love. It's hard to love the dark, gritty Superman. Save that for Batman. That's his job to be dark and gritty. Let Superman be the symbol of hope that he is supposed to be. A lot of times he's been called the ultimate Boy Scout because he's just always on the side of good, happy and be successful. It's kind of like John Cena's president and heads of states. He wants people to like him and he wants to save people. And so I mean that's what it is. He's the ultimate Boy Scout.
Wow. It's funny, man. We watched Heads of State last night as a family, and I'd already seen it a couple of times, and people didn't realize how violent it was. There was a lot of damn. But yeah, man, this movie world we're immersed in, this is actually a really good period because remember, we are a couple of weeks away from the fourth superhero film of the year in Fantastic Four that's coming out, which is ironic, Charles. The fourth film of the year is Fantastic Four.
Yeah.
But back on Superman, man. I'm almost ready for us to kind of hit this and talk about this because again, we've hit it from graphic novels, we've hit it from that angle of of the story and at the core who he is. It was also interesting when you talked about how dark and gritty Batman was, how Batman is portrayed alongside Superman, that he's always this stoic character that people want to tease, right? You think about Lego Batman, it's kind of like that vibe of that voice and that kind of mysterious exterior and don't mess with Batman. Batman's mad right now. So I've always gravitated toward Batman as a hero more so than Superman. But I do understand and get the Superman appeal. So apparently, Charles, for me, what it sounds like is somebody had to come along and tell the story in a way that was more faithful to the adaptation of what Superman's core values really were. And I hadn't seen a Superman that was kind of designed in that way. And so it's pretty interesting, man. It's pretty interesting in thinking about it now and understanding it. And I think the ability of having seen several animated films, read graphic novels. Now, I was having a conversation about Kingdom Come, which I read and
Oh,
loved, right? So
really?
they told me Kingdom Come, we can't make that one yet. We got to build up to that where these
Yeah,
characters look older. But
that's a deep series.
Kingdom Come was great. It was great. Superman, Wonder Woman, and Batman together hanging
Yeah,
out. Or
yeah.
older versions of them.
Older versions, grizzled, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Kingdom
Kingdom
Come.
Come was great.
Mark Wade did some really good work in writing that series.
Yeah, man. So, like I said, man, I kind of cherry pick around and read stuff, and I've got a couple here. So we're talking about the world of comics right now. Hey, Charles, at what point did we ever make Bitterroot? When are these? Because I know Regina King was attached to wanting to do these.
I don't know. That's gonna be that's a whole whew, that's a tough series right there with Bitterroot.
Yeah, I got the first two sitting here on my mantle. I'm like, bro, when are we gonna make these? Because if you tell me now we're gonna make some stuff now, I'll go back and read and I'll be ready to go. So Charles will have to be like, yeah, such and such. Got it.
I'm gonna say this, and I think Bitterroot is too deep of a story to be a movie. It would have to be a series, like if you put it on television, where you could get all the storylines straight and run it correctly.
Right.
But if you did it in a movie, you would have to have several movies before people would even get to understand what it's about. So yeah,
All right, Charles. It is now that moment we've been waiting for, brother. It's time for us to review Superman, right? So you ready?
yeah, I'm ready.
All right, let's hit it, man. All right. So Superman is the first film in the new DC universe, DCU, written and directed by James Gunn. And how do you pronounce this brother's last name? David Cornsweet? Cornsweet?
Corn sweat, yes.
David Cornsweet, Rachel Brosnahan, Nicholas Holt, Edie Gathagi.
Gathegi.
Gathegi. Now, this is embarrassing because this is a guy I met and know, and I can't pronounce his last name because I never call him his last name. He's always Edie. Edie Gathegi, Anthony Carrigan, Nathan Fillion, and Isabella Merced. And the film follows Superman as he reconciles his alien heritage with his human upbringing, all while bringing hope to a fractured world. And since I respect Charles Kirkland so much and his take on this, Charles, I know your review is already up on the FilmGordon.com and it's up worldwide because we put it on IMDb, brother. Share with the world your thoughts on Superman.
First, I think this movie is incredibly done. I think James Gunn is very intelligent in the way he approaches this because just as we've had this time before talking about who Superman is, and I think everybody, and I think James Gunn believes everybody knows who Superman is, where he comes from, and so he doesn't bother in going into giving us the whole story about how he came to be and all that. We don't need an origin story. He just says he gives you a few lines at the beginning, and we're right into the movie, which I think is fantastic because we don't need to waste time. He doesn't even waste time talking about Lex Luthor. He doesn't all he's like, here are these people, this is what's going on, deal with it. And it works because who wants to sit down with all of that nonsense again? And so Superman is the Boy Scout, Green Lantern is the butthole, Luthor is evil. Mr. Terrific is fantastic. I should say terrific because he's terrific. So you're just giving all these characters, and he's giving you all this as you go along, and I think it works tremendously. There's great action. Everything is shot well. It's bright. It's not dark like the old Batman movies. We gotten rid of all that pathos, and we've got light humor. We got hope. The direction of this film is fantastic, and so I can really see how James Gunn is really shaping this whole chapter of Gods and Monsters, which is the first segment of films in the DCU, and Superman is not o the only superhero. I mean, like I've said, we got Mr. Terrific and Hawk Girl and Green Lantern and a couple others that we'll see. I'm not going to say because they're kind of surprises. One of them, I was like, wow, okay, that's a real pull. But anyway. So yeah, I think the movie is well shot, well paced, story's great. He based it off of the comics like we talked about, All-Star Superman. And it really is relevant as to the time we're living in because we're talking about what does it mean to be human? And I guess we can extrapolate that to be what does it mean to be American and the differences between, I mean, why there's hate for aliens and things of that nature, people from not from this world. So you can kind of extrapolate it into the times that we're living in right now because we've got all these same issues going on around us. So I believe it's a fantastic movie. I think the tone is great. It works for everyone. There's not a lot of violence, but there is some. There's peril, and the odds are world shattering because it's Superman. It's got to be on a grand scale versus things happening in Gotham City. So I really enjoyed this movie, and if I were to give it a grade, I'd give it a B plus.
Got you, man. All right. So my thoughts on this, man, is, and you kind of said a lot of what I'm going to say, but of course, this is James Gunn's first film for the revamped DCU. I found the film to be entertaining, light, and well executed take on the Man of Steel, which I easily thought was the best comic superhero film so far to date, right? So
You mean to
kudos
date of this year? You mean
of
to
this
date of this
year.
year?
Yes, of this
Okay.
year. We talked about Captain America, Brave New World. We talked about the Thunderbolts. And soon, of course, we've got Fantastic Four. But up until we see Fantastic Four, this to me is my favorite of the year so far. Now, kudos to Gunn for trusting audiences, to your point, Charles, of knowing Kal-El's origin and jumping straight into the action. From the opening, we see Superman and Krypto, the Superdog, side by side in an adventure that feels like a comic book come to life. Corn Sweat channels Christopher Reeve's warmth from Superman 78, while Rachel Brosnahan's Lois Lane is every bit his equal, sharp, fearless, and a perfect match. I thought Nicholas Hoult delivered a memorable Lex Luthor, a villain who's both evil and envious of an outsider loved by the world in ways he never will be. Now, Gunn, of course, fills out the story with the Justice Gang, which is a good running joke. Nathan Fillion is Green Lantern. Gathegi is Mr. Terrific. And Isabella Merced is Hawk Girl. And Gathegi is terrific, right? He,
Yeah.
as is advertised, he is very, very good in the story. And the three of them bring heart and subplots of their own, making this world feel alive and connected. Now, after the success with Guardians of the Galaxy, Gunn clearly loves Superman and brings him back to what he represents: hope, kindness, and moral strength, a bright pivot away from the darker Snyderverse that we talked about a little earlier. Now, originally titled Superman Legacy, this version celebrates what makes Superman endure. It's layered, optimistic. Hell, Charles, it's just plain fun. I did the same thing you did. I gave it a B plus, man. I love this film. I went into it having read that there were lots of reviews of people that had seen it earlier, and they were going back and they were making tweaks, and folks were saying it wasn't well done. And I think you guys missed the mark, man. Superman is pretty impressive. And to me, it's probably the most fun I've had at a Superman movie since Superman 78. Because that,
Yeah.
when we first saw that man could fly, I was like, wow. So now, after having gone through a period, as you heard me teasing it earlier about, hey, man, maybe I just need to see Superman in a way that is ripped from the comics versus watching some of these films, and it makes a major difference, man. So even though Charles, I'll end by saying that I called James Gunn a traitor because I loved him so much when he was over at Marvel. Uh, you know, bro, you did your thing with Superman, and Charles is gonna hate this again. You ready, Charles? I stuck around and they gave me another. So I'm 2 for 2, Charles. Whenever I grab a poster, you remember the last poster I grabbed
That
was
was Sinners.
Center,
Yeah.
right? So if I grab your poster, that must mean your movie's gonna be pretty good. So I took the poster with glee, like
I didn't see you running away with an F1 poster.
you did not see me run away with an F1 poster, man. And but I liked
I
F1. I thought F1 was a good movie.
It was a good movie. But let me just say this. This is the movie that we should have gotten on July 4th for that weekend. This is the summer blockbuster right here. Superman is a fantastic film. You know, it was released on the 11th because as the story in Superman is about fathers and sons,
Right.
Gunn is paying homage to his father. His father's birthday is June 11th, July 11th. So that's why it's being released on July 11th.
Well, I don't know. Whatever James Gunn did works for me in this film, man. I just thought that it struck a tone, and it's a surprise, man, because again, it feels to me like, earlier we talked about how Sinners was a surprise. But actually it wasn't because it was a film that we knew was Ryan Coogler. We knew that that we had been reading a lot of stuff about it. And Superman feels the same way. We've been reading a lot of stuff about Superman. You knew James Gunn as a more than capable director, and it was just a matter, could he put it all together? And in this case, he actually did, man. I mean, so sometimes, Charles, we anticipate things going, you never know. There's certain people you can never say you never know. So what's a bad so for an example, what's a bad James Gunn movie? What out of the last four he's done, which one of those were bad?
Um, I
You,
can't
you
say
you're
there
making that
was one.
face because the answer is none.
I mean,
I liked all
as a
three of the Guardians.
yeah.
What else has Gunn done? I'm
Well,
sorry,
I mean,
that came out wrong. What else is what other films has James Gunn? What is his filmography? Because I'm interested.
he was involved with the Suicide Squad.
That was good.
He did Peacemaker, the
That's good.
series. He was a director of one of the segments of movie 43. So I mean, if you wanna really troll him,
Yeah, I'm not
there
trolling him for that.
well, I don't know why not.
Uh,
That
I wouldn't troll him for that, man, because again, I'm talking about films that he has helmed. So I'm looking through his stuff right now. Tromeo and Juliet. He wrote that. The Specials, he didn't direct that. As a director, Slither. Okay. Super.
oh, Slither. Okay, I remember Slither. That was
Super.
actually not bad.
Yeah, Guardians, Guardian. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I can't really troll him. I mean, Superman, Guardians of the Galaxy, Suicide Squad. He produced Brightburn, but he didn't write or direct that. He did Guardians. He did write the Belko Experiment and produce it, but didn't direct it. As a director, like I said, I can't find fault in a lot of what James Gunn has done, man. And I think that kind of speaks to what we always talk about on this podcast, man, about film as a director's media, right? If you get a guy that can really do this and direct, now you heard me earlier talking about Spike Lee. Spike Lee, of course, has made several films where I'm like, come on, man, you better than this, Spike. I don't know what you're doing, bro. I mean, Charles, you know what I'm talking about. Like, come on, Spike. You better than
Yeah,
this,
yeah,
man.
yeah.
But, people like Gina Prince Bythewood, Christopher Nolan. I think about folks who rarely, I don't see anything bad. Like Steven Spielberg made 1941, right? You got to bring that up. I mean,
Yeah.
wasn't good. Wasn't good. So every filmmaker has some questionable walks on the wild side sometimes. But James Gunn, for the most part, I knew I should have had more faith going in that he would deliver on Superman, not just because he's a good director, but you gave him a story he really, really loved. He loved Superman as a kid, had always fantasized about wanting to make a Superman movie. So when it was his turn to make one, you knew he was going to put everything he had into it, man. So there you go, Charles.
So, so to 2 points I want to make real quick. You know, Brightburn is a Superman story. It was a
Right.
Superman. It's one of those Elseworld stories. Was what if Superman was raised in whatever way. Um, but what James Gunn has done, you call him a traitor, but you know this happens in the comic book world all the
I'm
time.
teasing you when I called
I
him a
know,
traitor.
I know, and I'm just want to say, you, comic books writers and directors are not beholden to an agency. I mean, we just lost Jim Shooter, who did a lot of Batman, did some Marvel, and started a new Valiant Comics, which is another brand. So for Gunn to go from Marvel to DC, who knows? He may go back to Marvel. It's just all about where the stories are inspiring you, and he just like you said, it's been all his dream to do Superman, and so when he got the opportunity, he jumped at it. More power to him.
All right, Charles. Well, with that said, man, that wraps up today's show, man. Make sure you stay connected at Film Gordon and visit the filmgordon.com for reviews, including Charles' review and this podcast review, which is going to go up immediately. Also features and festival coverage. And don't forget, you can listen to Film Gordon or Keeping It Real on podcast channels everywhere. And until next time, keep it bold, keep it true, and always, for Charles, keep it real. We'll see you guys on the other side. You take care and continue to enjoy the dog days of summer, man. And we are out. Peace.